Spotlight is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. It seeks to spotlight people, places, and events from around the Diocese of Youngstown that promote the new gospel of joy called for by Pope Francis. Your program host is Father James Corda.
Hello and welcome to Spotlight. I'm Father Jim Corda. Today we're going to talk with news veteran Stan Boney. Welcome to Spotlight. It's nice to have you on.
Thank you very much.
And we know that you are with 27 First News, WKBN,
yes.
And many people, I'm sure, are very familiar with you. And I think for the folks that are with us, they'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So maybe we could begin by just you telling us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you're
my
from.
resume.
Please.
We'll start with that.
Thank you.
Well, I'm 59 years old. I was born and raised in Findlay, Ohio, which if you jump on Route 224 in the Boardman Canfield area, drive 170 miles west, you'll run right smack dab in the middle of downtown Findlay. 224 has been the connection of my life. They link each town. I was born and raised there. My father, my brother, my sister, and some of my family members still live there. And I go home quite often. My mother's now deceased, but my father is still around, so I go home to visit him quite often. I was born and raised there. I went to high school there, Findlay High School, graduated in 1975, and then I enrolled at Ohio University in Athens. I went there and I majored in broadcast journalism. I knew from a fairly early age that I wanted to get into TV news. I started thinking I wanted to be a sportscaster. When I went to OU, I was introduced to news, and when I graduated from OU in 1979, I had a background in both sports and news, which really was good for me. At that point, I got a job in a small radio station in Dayton, and I worked there for 4 months. It was an all news and talk station, something like WKBN AM is here in Youngstown. So I worked there for 4 months, and then the job opened up in Youngstown, and I came to Youngstown in October of 1979. This year will be my 38th year in October that I have been in Youngstown doing broadcasting. My first job was with WYTV Channel 33. I worked there for, 35 some years, and I did that for a long time. I did sports for a while. I reported the news for a while, but I think the longest thing I ever did at 33 is I was the weather guy.
Right.
I was the meteorologist, and I think that's what a lot of people still remember me as. Yeah. And I did the weather for 33 for probably 30 years, maybe, or something like that. And then when WYTV and WKBN merged, that was in December of 2007, I moved up to the WKBN building, but was still working for WYTV. And I did that for a number of years until September when I became WKBN. Also, when the merger happened, I got out of weather. It was just, there was a lot of things happening. Then we're trying to figure out how to make both stations work in one building. And it was we made some mistakes when we did it. And one thing I decided is to make me the anchor. So then when Paul Wetzel came in and did the weather, Chad Krasminski did the sports, and now all three of us are now together on WKBN. But anyway, the three of us were a team, and I was the anchor, and then eventually it was decided to move me over to the WKBN, and that's where I've been. I report during the evening news between 5 and 6 o'clock, and then I anchor the 10 o'clock on Fox and the 11 o'clock on WKBN. That's a brief synopsis.
Now, your beginnings in radio, it's interesting because oftentimes when I talk to somebody who's been in television, they find that their beginnings was always in radio. Is there any reason for that, or is that just how you started?
At the time, they were both so big.
True.
And the radio stations had news staffs. The station that I worked for in Dayton had a news staff of 5, which may not sound a lot, but that was pretty big for a radio news staff at the time. But then they started weeding that out. Radio stations now have become more condensed. They're only owned by so many companies, and I'm not 100% sure that there is a radio newsman in Youngstown that's dedicated only to reporting the news. Sure. I know that we provide some of the information to WKBN. I know our weather people provide some of the information to WKBN radio. We're not even associated anymore. We're not in the same building. We're not owned by the same company. The only thing that's the same is we have the same call letters. That's the only thing that's the same. But there were opportunities in radio at the time that I got in to do radio news. Those opportunities don't really exist anymore. It's not in Youngstown. I don't know about the major markets. I'm sure there are still radio news people in New York City and Chicago, but even there, I can imagine the jobs are getting smaller and smaller all the time.
You know, in your many years with television, especially with the news, what have you seen change in that regards? You know, there's obviously mergers and change in staff and things like that, but is there any significant changes that you've experienced that really has affected you in your life?
I'm working harder now than I ever have in my entire career. Okay. One of the big changes, and it really just hit me in the last couple of years, when I started, we did a 6 o'clock news and an 11 o'clock news. That was it. Right. I mean, for the entire day, the entire news staff. Then they added the morning news. So they added 2 hours in the morning. We did also have a noon news every once in a while. So I take that back. There was a noon, a 6, and an 11. Okay. And then we added 2 hours in the morning. Then we added an hour and a half at 5. So now we go from 5 to 6:30. Then they added a 10. You know, Fox came along and allowed the Fox stations to do 10. And then we started doing Saturday and Sunday morning news. So we do 2 hours on Saturday morning and an hour and a half on Sunday morning. So what used to be maybe an hour and a half of news a day is now 8.5 hours of news a day, plus early morning weekends. There is so much news and such a demand for original content, new content. They don't want to overlap. What was on the 6 o'clock news, they don't want on the 11 o'clock news, because in this day and age, people have already heard it. So that is the largest change, other than the technology. I mean, the use of technology. When I started, we used manual typewriters. Sure. Now we have, word processors and computers and the internet. But other than the technology, that was probably one of the major things, is the amount of news that we do is 5 times more than what we did when I first started. Yeah.
We've got just about a few minutes left of our first segment. What about the news is so important for people to understand? I mean, and people just like thrive on it. They do. And there's a sensationalism about it sometimes too. Why is that?
Well, I think people thrive on it because they want information. Information seems to be the one big thing, and maybe it's not just the news. People also want information if their sister is pregnant. People thrive on that. Sure. They like, and that's where social media, I think, has come into play. So it's not necessarily the president has decided today to do this type of thing. It's, oh my gosh, my cousin Julie just graduated from college, and take a look at the picture that is there. They love that kind of information. People thrive on that. The sensationalism, I think, just deals with the way it's just inborn. You can go over the top with sensationalism depending on how a story is presented, but sometimes just in its pure manner, it would be hard not to sensationalize some of the crimes or the fires or the type of information that we pass out. Just in its own effect, it is sensational. If you were driving by and saw a huge building on fire, automatically it screams sensational. Okay, it's in its own way. So sometimes it's just the story is sensational, though we certainly can peak it more to add to the sensationalism and give it the story flavor that's there. I'm not going to deny we don't, and we do that sometime as well.
Sure, we're going to take a quick break.
Okay, Father.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We are in our 7th year, Cristo Rey Jesuit High School. It arose from the desire of the Jesuits in the Chicago province to serve the Hispanic community here in Chicago. One of the things that's unique about this school is that our kids work 5 days a month at offices in downtown Chicago to pay for their education. That idea originated here. We got telephone calls the first day from the companies thanking us for sending us those kids to their companies. The companies feel good about themselves. 95% of our kids are the first ones in their families to finish high school, and 87% of our graduates are in college right now. This project attracts wonderful, wonderful, enthusiastic, idealistic people. They have to have the desire to kind of reach for the stars. No one believed that it would be as successful as it is. Well, it's obviously caught on, and we're very, very excited about it.
I am Marino.
Yo soy Marino.
Marino, an American Catholic organization of priests and brothers, has been reaching out to those in need for nearly 100 years in 26 countries throughout the world. Missioners, workers, volunteers, supporters, we are all Marino.
I'm Father Mike, and I am Marino.
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 Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm talking with Stan Boney from WKBN 27 First News. We were talking about how news has changed. Let's talk about how the community has changed. You know, Youngstown over the years has thrived and then has gone into the valley and is hopefully picking up again. What have you seen about the community that's significant, that's changing, that is something that we need to be aware of?
Well, first of all, I am post-Steele. So I don't know Youngstown before. I came in 1979. The Camel Works Black Monday was in 1977. I came in October of 79. In November of 79, U.S. Steel announced it was shutting down. And Republic went shortly right after that. So I missed Strauss downtown. I missed Idora Park. I mean, I was there for a while, but I really didn't see it in its heyday. Sure. I didn't drive along Wilson Avenue or Poland Avenue and see the mills spewing it out. I missed all of that. When I got here, Youngstown was already on the downslide, and I was a part of that. Those were the stories that I covered and what I did. I think the big thing that stands out is the decrease in population, the number of people that have moved away because of a lack of opportunity. Even when I started, I work on the South Side. I've lived on the South Side. I'm kind of an adoptive South Sider. I didn't grow up there, but I've lived on, when I first moved to town, I lived on Ellenwood Avenue, which is on the lower South Side. I lived in Struthers for a while and Brownlee Woods for a while. And now I live in Boardman, which is really just an extension of the South Side. So I grew up on the South Side, and when I grew up there, driving up South Avenue was vibrant. There were restaurants there, and there were bars there, and there were people out there. Well, you drive up South Avenue now, and there's not a whole lot happening. People are trying to bring it back, and they're working to bring it back, but there's not a whole lot going on, so that has changed. So the focus of the community really is now in the suburbs. It has become that Poland, Boardman, Canfield, Austintown hook, I guess you could call it, that kind of goes around the southern and the western part of the city. So that is where most of the commerce is. That's where a lot of the people live. That's where everything seems to be happening. Now, they brought downtown back. The neighborhoods around the city still need some work, and I don't know what's going to happen to them. Most of them are now just vacant pieces of property, and we're going to have to decide what to do with those along the way. The suburbs are doing okay. I think they are. Poland and Boardman and Canfield and Austintown, they have some problems, I suppose. Sure. But economically and everything else, they're doing okay. You're also seeing more growth in places like the South Range School District or Columbiana, people like that. They always have. Some people like the rural areas. But I think the biggest thing is just as you lose people, then you lose everything. You need people to make it happen. And one of the big things is the decrease in the population.
Another thing that I'd like you to comment on, and this probably might be unfair, but
it's all right. I ask unfair questions all the time. Go ahead.
I think the news and the media have been getting an unfair rap nowadays. I think sometimes, the idea of alternative news or fake news. I think it's important to understand what news really is and what media is all about and what the golden mission is. And I think once we understand that, we know that we're not about fake news. How do you bridge that? How do you really communicate that to the folks?
Well, it's really hard now with social media out there. I mean, it really is difficult. People are on their Twitter, they're on their phones, they're on their Facebook pages. And I am too. I use social media, so I'm using it at the same time. One thing I've noticed that I do personally, though I might be a little more educated than the average person, when I'm scrolling through a feed and I see a headline and I'm going, I'm not quite so sure if that one's true. I look right away at the source. And if it's not a reputable news source, to me that's the Washington Post or the New York Times or the LA Times or the Atlanta Journal-Constitution or CBS or NBC or ABC or CNN, then I don't usually open it, okay? But if the Washington Post is reporting something and I'm reading the headline and going, oh, really? I will open it up and I will read it and I will believe it, okay? Now, news media does make mistakes every once in a while, but at least I know that the reporter at this story at the Washington Post has been researched. The phone calls have been made. It's been handed to an editor, and an editor's looked it over and asked questions and decided what to do and said, okay, this is good, print it or put it on the internet or wherever it goes from there. So that's one way that I personally make sure that it's not fake news. Locally, you don't see so much of it around Youngstown. It's more of a national thing, but that's the way I do it. If it's not, I don't even open it. And also I don't open it if I can tell that it's from a slanted news org. If it's a real Republican or a real Democrat one, and the Democrats are criticizing the Republicans and the Republicans are criticizing the Democrats, I don't even open it. I want a reputable news source. Now, if the Republicans are criticizing the Democrats and the Washington Post is writing about it, I might open it and read that at the same time.
Is there any particular news story over the years that has really stuck with you, that you remember and that you actually can go back and visualize you telling the story? Is there something that touched you or that you felt was just so profound?
Well, I tell you what, most of the stories that I really always found profound were the stories of people. One of the stories that I did was Don Guthrie recently died from pancreatic cancer, and he was diagnosed, and we all knew it. And I thought it was a news story. I thought, that if it would have been any other well-known member of our community, we would have done the story. But I think in our news department, we were hesitant to do the story because he was one of our family, and how do we handle this? So I went to my boss and I said, I want to do the Don Guthrie story. I said, number one, Don knows what we do. He's not going to be surprised that we would want to do a story on him. And we discussed it, and I said, let me call Don and see what he says. So I called Don. I said, Don, I know what your situation is. I feel bad, but I think this is a news story. I think this is something the community, I totally agree with you. He said, I totally agree. So we set it up, we put it together. I went to Columbus when he was undergoing treatment. I followed him around. I dug up some old pictures of him when he was younger, and I did the whole Don Guthrie story. And I thought it was. I never got more reaction from people anywhere from doing that story. You didn't realize how many people appreciated and liked Don in the community until they found out that he was dying. And at that point, we laid it out. So it's stories like that, believe it or not, that have more impact on me than covering a Hillary Clinton campaign event, which I covered, and a Donald Trump campaign event, which I covered. And I can remember those, and I will always remember those. But having an effect on me, I covered it, I did my job, I reported what she had to say, and then I moved on. But hanging out with Don that day and then sitting down and composing this story, and actually seeing the reaction of the entire community, those are the type of things that really have more of a profound effect on me than the really big political or sensational stories that are out there. I enjoy covering them all, but those are the ones that affect me most.
We're going to talk more, but we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
Well, I've been volunteering for 18, almost 20 years for volunteer chore service for Catholic Community Services. What I do is help the elderly in their homes so that they can stay in their homes. I do work from shopping to housework to yard work. Most of the people I see don't really have a lot of family, so then I become almost like their family.
I think a lot of times the elderly in our society are forgotten, and that's unfortunate because they're a real important part of our community because they have so much wisdom to share.
Doing this type of work is very rewarding. You can't put it into words because I learned so much from these people, and you learn stuff about yourself too. You learn to see God in a variety of people, in a variety of settings. The other day she told me that every night when she goes to bed, she thinks about her little angel, when her little angel's going to come and check on her the next day. And that's me, yeah.
33 million Americans have descended into poverty. And as their futures fall, so does our nation's.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm talking with Stan Boney from WKBN 27 First News. Stan, tell us a little bit about your faith life. You know, I know that's a personal thing to ask, but I think as a Catholic, I think other Catholics would be interested in your life as a Catholic, as a churchgoer. What do you think about church and faith and Catholicism?
Well, I was born and raised Catholic. Both my mother and father were Catholic. I went to Catholic school for 8 years. Then I went to a public high school in Findlay because we didn't have a Catholic high school. And then I quit. Growing up, we went to church every day. We were very faithful Catholics. We lived and preached the Catholic faith. My mother lived it really well. She was a very spiritual person. She always told me that everybody needs a little spirituality in their life. And I think by saying that, she even means even if the Indians worship the sun, and she could understand that it brings comfort to people, and it does. And then I got away from the church probably in my 20s. I think a lot of us did when we were in our 20s. Sure. And then I got married, and my wife was a church-going person, and I went back to the church, and now I go to Mass pretty much every Sunday. Very rarely do I miss. I have some disagreements with the church. I don't believe I call them, people have told me you're not allowed to be a cafeteria Catholic, but I am a cafeteria Catholic. I pick and choose what I want to believe in. Sure. Some of the things I like about the church is I like the structure. I like the sacrament ends of it. I also like the Mass. You know, I do enjoy going to Mass. Sometimes I get a little lost in it. Sometimes I start to daydream. I think we all do probably, those of us that have gone to church for so many years. I've had some issues with the church over the years, but I've never left. One of the things, but I have issues with every organization that I'm in. Ask anybody that I work with at WKBN, and I have debates all the time. I don't agree with everything that WKBN does, but I'm a member of that organization, and I think I agree with most of everything that WKBN does. But there's debates back and forth. And same thing with the Catholic Church. I don't always agree with everything that they do, but I've just kind of hung in there over the years and continue to be a practicing Catholic. I'm a member of St. Charles Church. We give to the church. We're a part of the church. We could do more, probably. Everybody could do more. But that's basically a sum of where my faith is at.
Sure. Tell us about your typical day. You know, we would think that when we see you on television that you're there just for that particular time, but we know better.
Yes,
we know that you're a full-time job. Yeah. So tell us about one of your typical days. What's it like?
Okay. I wake up at early in the morning. One thing I usually do is I read the Vindicator cover to cover. First thing I do. I'm in the news business, and I want to see what the Vindicator is covering. They do a lot more things than we do. They do other things they run things that we don't run, and I want to know what they're doing, and that's how I start my day. I usually spend about an hour between 10 or 11 on the phone, lining up things for later in the day. Where am I going to go? What's going on? I have calls I have to make. And then I usually work out, eat some lunch, take a shower, and I try to be to work by 2:30. I go in at 2:30, and then I usually go out and cover whatever is going on. The news starts at 5 o'clock. Sometimes I'll do a live shot between 5 and 6. Sometimes I'm covering multiple stories at one time. I'll cover a story at 5, I'll move on, cover a different story at 6. I usually try to get back at the station by 7 o'clock. I sit down, I take what I have gathered throughout the day, I now write those stories, sometimes multiple stories, 2 or 3. I write those stories, I try to be done with that by about 8:30, and then I have to prep for the 10 and the 11 o'clock news. The 11 o'clock news is over at 11:35. I actually believe it runs 5 more minutes. I clean up my desk, figure out what I need to do, and most days I'm out the door by midnight and home shortly thereafter.
Sure.
It's a long day.
It's a long day and a full day.
Full day. Every day.
Tell the folks that are with us what you like to do for fun. I mean, obviously you probably take a vacation.
I do.
You do some fun things. You have any hobbies? Something that you really enjoy other than your job?
My job. My wife and I are big into walking and hiking. I also like to stretch and lift some weights. I know that those are both important, so I do that as well. We're both into our health. I eat well. I don't eat perfect. I don't hope I never have to eat perfect. But I eat well, and I try to exercise well. I play golf. One of the things I'm trying to do that we do is I'm on a mission to visit as many national parks as possible. One of my little missions in life. There are 59 national parks in the United States. I have been to 11 of them.
Wonderful.
I'm probably not going to make it to all of them because some of them are in very remote places. There's one that is above the Arctic in Alaska. It has no roads in or out. There's no ranger station there. It is literally the wilderness. I probably won't make it there. I haven't been to any parks in Alaska. I do plan on visiting a couple. That's probably not one that I will get to. I'm not that hardcore, okay? But one of my missions is to get to I want to make the big ones. I haven't been to Yosemite. I haven't been to Glacier. I've been to the Grand Canyon. I've been to Acadia. I've been to Cuyahoga Valley, which is really just a very short jaunt from us. I've been to the Everglades. So I've been to some of them, but one of my goals is to get to as many as possible. And I don't think I'll make it to all 59 because I would also like to see, I've been to Italy, but that's the only place outside of the United States that I've ever really, other than the Caribbean, that I've ever been to. So I'd like to go to London. I'd like to go to the Holy Land. I'd like to go to Germany, Poland, China. There's a lot of places that I would like to see. So I'm one of the things, I really enjoy traveling. And that's one of the things that we do quite often. My wife and I take several trips a year.
In our last 2 minutes together, what would you tell the folks that are with us about how we should view and listen to the news? You know, because many people tune in and watch the news or listen to it on radio. How should we do that? What should be our disposition?
I don't think you need a disposition.
Okay.
How could I tell somebody how to watch TV? I think I understand where you're going with the question. I don't know. Just sit down and watch it and take it for what it is. Also, there is fake news, but if you're listening to or watching a legitimate news organization, and they tout themselves of that, and they're in the mainstream media, they're not giving you fake news. They might be wrong, and we do make mistakes, and then we correct our mistakes. But we don't put anything out there on purpose to guide you in the wrong direction. We do occasionally put out wrong information, especially with as much news as we do now. But then we retract that and we make sure that the information is corrected. But I don't know if there's any real way to do it. People nowadays, also when they're watching the news, they got their iPad in front of them, they're scrolling as well. So they got multiple sources going on at one time. I'd like to tell them to put that one down and just watch us, but that's not going to work because I do the same thing. When I'm watching TV, sometimes I got my iPad with me and I'm checking out things that go along.
One of those people too.
Yes, right. That's the way that's the world we live in.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
Stan Boney, it's such a pleasure
Father
to have you on the show.
Very much. It was my
Thank
pleasure.
You very much.
Thank you very much.
And God bless you in your work.
You too, sir.
And we thank you for spending the time with us today.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Spotlight has been a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Corda.